I remember when I was 5 years old, my dad and I were standing outside of our house. We were in Kenya in a town called Kericho, and we called the house Lobo's house because the landlord was Lobo. I remember standing right outside. This house had a courtyard. It's a super weird house, but it had a courtyard. We're standing outside, and I remember my dad was writing something down on a piece of paper, and he said, "Derek, I'd rather trust a short pencil than a long memory." And I don't know why he said that. I don't know what he was writing down. I don't know the significance of the event other than I remember that very specific event as if it was yesterday. I remember standing there as a 5 year old looking up at my dad. And I even remember like when he had the notebook out writing in it, it was about at my height to my head. And I thought when he said that, I'd rather trust a short pencil than a long-term memory. I thought as a 5 year old, that was the dumbest thing I had ever heard anybody say. In all 5 years of my life, I thought it was the dumbest thing I had ever heard anybody say. And I took that with me when I was 6 years old and 7 years old and 10 years old and 15 years old and 20 years old. I hung on to the idea that writing things down was a dumb, horrible, stupid, dumb advice. I went to college, and at the beginning of the semester in college, you're handed 5 syllabi, whatever they're called, with all the assignments for the year, what's due when, yada, yada, yada. I never wrote any of that down. I just had it all conglomerated somehow, and I tried to keep track of it all in my head. And it was chaotic. And I was in college for 7 years. And all 7 years of college, I never wrote my assignments down in an orderly fashion. I just kind of kept up with them as they came. And I remember when I think back to college, when I drive by the campus of Bob Jones University, I just get this sense of like, oh, those years were so hard. Well, they were partly hard because they were just chaotic because I never wrote anything down. And I just tried to keep up with everything. And then my wife, on the other hand, couldn't breathe at the beginning of a semester until she wrote everything down on a calendar and had all of her assignments assimilated into one really nice calendar. And actually, I used to make fun of, she was my girlfriend at the time. I used to make fun of her for having to write everything. I remember there's another lady that I worked with. Her name was Julie. That she did the same thing. I used to make fun of them. Like, that's a ridiculous thing. Who needs to write all that stuff down? Well, here's the deal. I made a decision when I was 5 that writing things down was a really dumb idea. Now, as a 5-year-old, I recognize that was the most logical thing for me to think at that moment that I was 5. But by the time I was 15, by the time I was 20, I was still defending that decision from when I was 5, instead of looking at the facts and saying it'd be a lot easier, Derek, if you just took an hour or 2 to write everything down. But no, I had made a decision when I was 5, and I was going to defend that decision. Not only was it in college, but it was after college, into my working career, that I wouldn't write things down because I was still defending this idea I had from when I was 5. Here's the lesson. I was unwilling to be wrong. I was unwilling to recognize that my 5-year-old version of myself didn't know as much as I knew when I was 20. I was unwilling to say 5-year-old Derek had a few things to learn. I took 5-year-old Derek and I enshrined him in this, in this aura of wisdom. It sounds facetious, but when you really think about what I was doing was, I took what 5-year-old Derek decided, and I decided to hold on to that and not change my mind for 20 plus years. And my life was chaotic, and it was everywhere because I wasn't remembering everything, and things were slipping through my hands, but I wouldn't write it down. And it's only been in the last couple of years that I've been willing to say, I think 5-year-old Derek didn't know everything. I think 25-year-old Derek, who still wasn't writing things down to remember them and organize his life, didn't know everything. And I'm not perfect at it by any means, but I've made a huge improvement over the last couple of years of writing things down in a calendar, writing things down in my reminders, setting reminders for myself, doing things. And do I have room to grow? I absolutely do. I'm not saying I'm perfect at this. But what I see is that too often I have held on to a decision from the past. And when I've seen that decision doesn't serve me anymore, I still hang on to it because I want to defend myself from 5 years ago, or I want to defend myself from last week. I've been thinking about driving on a trip. You know, we've lived halfway across the country from our family before, so we've taken several trips, several 100-mile trips. And at some point, there's detours and reroutes, and you know the GPS says you can go this way or this way, and I'll make a decision to go this way, whatever way that is. And halfway through there, you know, Katie might say something kind of like, "Oh, this ended up taking a little longer than you thought," and I would get so mad and so frustrated because I want to be right. No, this is the right way. I'm defending a poor decision. Was it a poor decision at the time? It was the best decision I thought with everything I had at the moment. But looking back, I wasn't willing to be wrong. And this goes back to this idea that I'm working on for myself, the willingness to be wrong. The willingness to say, I didn't know everything back then. Duh, of course I didn't know everything, but sometimes I still act as if I should know everything. It's the idea about that I want hindsight, which only comes after the fact. I want the hindsight before the fact. So one thing I'm working on is not defending dumb decisions. One thing I'm working on is the willingness to be wrong, to make a decision and then say, I see how that wasn't the best decision, and then course correct in real time instead of getting to the end of the journey, end of the path, or the end of our lives and looking back and going, yeah, I held on to that wrong decision for way too long. I think the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to be a faithful steward is the willingness to look in the moment and say, is this still the best? Is this still the best? And if it's not about judging yourself. It's not about judging myself and saying, man, how could have you made that decision? It's about saying, is this still the best? No, it's not still the best. Okay, here we are. What's the next best step? My friend Chip Bailey asks that a lot. What's the next best step? So instead of defending dumb decisions from the past and just decisions from the past, is this still serving me? And if it's not, okay, what does serve me now? And go with that. Instead of driving forward with just looking at the rearview mirror, which is what I was doing with defending my 5-year-old self, look through the wide open windshield of what the future can hold and make decisions based on what the future holds and what's possible instead of defending the thing from the past. That's what I'm learning. What are y'all learning today? I'd love to know in the comments. What are you learning today?